Welcome to Hasty's Warhammer channel. Today we're going to talk about the movement phase and a little bit about the other phases as well, and then we'll go into the 4 different phases. But in the beginning of the video we'll talk a little bit about how to set up the table, what you need to do with it, etc. But mainly this video is for a movement phase in a game, and it's going to be 4 episodes on how to do this. And as always, Baylor is going to be helping us out, and hopefully this time he won't eat the models. And let's get started. And thank you again for joining. Hi, we're going to go through a little bit of the rule book today. It's going to be this little bad boy right here. What we're going to try to accomplish in this episode is go through the setup of the game and then go through the basic things of the movement phase and how that works. We're also going to show a few of the characters here on the table, how they move, so you have that down. The second episode will then go into more the magic phase and how that works. But for today we're going to look at the movement phase and the starting of the game. So using the 2 cameras here, so we can open up the books, you'll have, is the first couple of pages that you see in the book. It's going to talk about the same thing that we did in the last episode. So you could skip some of this, since we've gone through what you need to do from movement trays to paper and pens and dice. But I highly recommend you watch that video first before you see this one, because this is more like getting you ready to see a battle rep that we're going to play later. It's hard to follow along if you haven't seen the basics, and that's what we're doing, these basic ones first. Plus we're also trying to get you, if you have been gone for a long time, I mean, it takes a while to get back into the game, and watching these videos would be great for you if you're coming back, or if you're brand new, it's perfect for you to get started. But the first few pages in the book will tell you what you need, what you need to bring with you. Then the next thing, what you have to do is you have to decide what kind of army you're going to have and how you put it together. In this episode we're not going to go into the details how to make your army, because that's it's an episode almost by itself, how to make it. We might decide to go into that if we have people asking for it, and then we'll go into those details as well. After you made your army, how do you deploy it? It shows a little bit here on the deployment. We've done this on the table itself to have it deployed, and then where you place them, and we'll go into that when we actually start the game, like how do you place the units. A little bit about the terrain and how do you win. And the way that you win in this game is, you normally, in a normal game that could be a little different, is that you have either you annihilate the opponent totally, or they give up because they know they can't win, or you win with points. And every little unit, depending what you have a point system to it. And depending on who you're killing, if they have a flag bearer, the general, if it's the whole squadron of a unit, is what it's called in this game, then you get the points values for that. And sometimes you can even target a certain individual within a unit and get it out. And if that is a special character, then you also get points for that. But in the end, if we win with roughly 100 points more than the opponent, if it's less than that, it's a draw. Then if you win around, normally in our games, if you win with 400 points or more, it's a real victory. Otherwise it's just barely a victory. And if you totally annihilate them, then obviously you have bragging rights until the next game. That's the way it is. And we're a little bit fun with that, and a little ruthless, and have a lot of blast with who's winning and stuff like that. But it's really up to you. It's kind of how your house rules are and what you like. Some people even have it if you whoever wins get a free dinner or a free beer or something like that going out. But it's all, I would highly recommend you have something on every game, that whoever is the winner gets something. And if you play like a big game like us, we play with 5 people at once, maybe then the biggest loser gets to do something, or the biggest winner, he gets something, and it makes it more fun. Or if you have like a home tournament where you're playing multiple games, try to have something in the end, like giveaway module or something like that. It's always more fun if you have something that is there to win. You don't have to though, but it's definitely something I recommend. I have tried before to whoever loses come and clean our house, do those kind of things, but never got them to agree on those things. But maybe a little bit smaller stuff. A little bit here about the book. They have. All right. It has one of the things that you do need to get into, and I think we'll do that now, is how the characteristics of models are, because without that it will be tough to do. So we'll go through this. On a character, you're going to see that they have certain have a bunch of numbers, and what the first thing is going to say M, that's for movement, and that tells you how far you get to move, and there's very many rules around that. That is when we remember how in the last episode we showed the ruler and how many inches that is. So that is, you actually see how many inches you can move. Weapon skill, or WS, is how well you're at fighting to hitting something, and there's tables around us how to do that, and when we go into the fighting phase we'll show you how that works. Ballistic skill, same thing, but on the shooting side, the higher the number the better you are at shooting. The same thing with WS, the higher the number the better you are at attacking. Ballistic skill, we went through that already. So strength is how strong you are, how much damage you normally deal in close combat. Some range, if you throw like an axe or something like that, that would help. But normally if you shoot a bow, this is not going to give you this on the weapon itself. The strength modifier changes depending what you're using. Medical items or weapons change the strength as well, but we'll talk about how that goes into effect. T stands for toughness. That's how much damage you can mitigate. It's not how much damage you can take. That is the wounds. The toughness is actually every time you're trying to hit someone, you can block it by just being a big giant that has a lot of strength. So a little Skaven is going to have a hard time killing a giant. But a giant is not going to have a hard time squishing a few Skavens because it's so small. And that's all about the toughness. Wounds is how many wounds or lives do you have. Normally a character has one wound, but larger stuff like an ogre or a giant or a monster has more. But on average, almost everyone has one wound. So if you do some damage, that guy is out of the game unless they have some kind of save. Initiative is how fast you are. It makes a big difference in this game if you get to fight first. If you have a faster initiative than someone else, whatever you do and kill an opponent, his units, they can't fight back with those units. However, if you have the same initiative, then you just have to decide who goes first, but everything actually happens. So even if you kill their whole unit with 20 characters, those 20 characters get to still attack you because they have the same initiative. So something really funny can happen. You can both kill each other at the same time and the units are all dead. Doesn't happen very often though, I have to say, but it's something that could happen. But always keep an eye on initiative. In a group, there might be multiple characters with different initiatives, so you always have to take the ones that are highest first. There's some skills that make you go last. Like it says always fight last. There's another one that's always fight first. And then you have to take those skills in account. Attacks, the A symbol on there, it tells you how many attacks that you have. If it says 1, that means you only get to attack once per character. If it says 3, for instance, you get to attack with all 3. However, if you're on the second row, unless there's something special rule for that, then you only get your supporting attacks, that's what it's called. You only get to attack with one of your attacks, not your full range. Certain characters like an ogre, for instance, that are bigger than normal humans, they get to use all their attacks in the second row. Leadership is how well you do fair checks and do different kind of commands when you want to reform and that kind of stuff. It's very good to have a high reflex. If you fight an army that causes fear or do something that makes you run, if you have a low leadership, like Skavens for instance, they need to be large groups. If not, they're extremely weak and they just run off the table. And when one unit runs, most likely another unit that sees it will run as well. And you can run off with half of your army in the first round if you don't actually play correctly. So if you have low leadership, don't count on just running around alone. Character profile. You have, it's always the way it works. If you look at one of these units right here, the way that you're going to have it is that this is the facing forward as a 45 arc. So everything that is within this area is your front. This is the sides, and this is the rear. So when you form up units, they have this where it shows right here how you form them up. But it's really up that you're forming into squares. It's fine. You're not allowed to do them jagged. It's okay to not fill up a full row. You're not allowed to have more in the front rank than you have in the back. You can't like have in the middle, for instance, to have something that takes out. It needs to be like a real block. We talked about facing a little bit as well. The forward, the rear, the flanks, and if you're attacking someone, it's the 45-degree angle, and that's what this picture is showing. Measuring distances, just a general principle on that. You always go from one corner to the next. So if you have two of these, the stance like this is from the closest distance ever. If you have something like this, it's not from here to here, it's actually from that little corner to that corner. So it's always the closest two parts that you're counting. And then there is some rules on that on how that works. We went through a lot of the dices already, but what you can do when you're doing certain things, you can add modifiers to it. So some of these, when it says a d6 plus 1, that means that you take one dice as a d6 and then you add one to it. Reroll means that you have to re-roll whatever you have and you cannot use what was there. Roll off is actually when if it says in the rule that you have to roll off and see who wins, and that's the highest dice then win. If it's equal, you just re-roll. Templates we went through in the last episode, so we'll skip that. But it has a really nice way we can actually see the models and how that works. Then you have the characters tests, and this is done depending on what skill level you have. If it's the basic skills, then it's a d6. If you have a strength 6 test, then you roll a d6 to see if it works. You automatically fail on a natural 1 no matter what you roll, or 2 number 1s if you roll 2 dices. If you have higher, like a leadership test, then you need to roll 2d6, because normally you have somewhere between 5 and 10 in leadership. No one has higher than 10 in leadership. Then you have to have some kind of item to make that happen. Line of sight. Different players play with this, but normally what line of sight means is that you take a unit, a character like this, and if you have something in the way, you have to actually be able to see him. So in this case, you can see the model because from his face, you can see him. If he was over here, everything is blocking you, you can't see him, then you don't have line of sight. So that's what I mean. We have different rules in our game where we play this. If something is in the way, we just decide that it's -2. And that's what it normally would be if you had hard cover. It just makes it easier when we're playing, because then we're not sitting here arguing about, can I really see him? Can I see the plate? What am I looking at? Is it the shoulders? Is it the weapons? The book describes this, but it's normally more problems from that than it's worth going into. Our basic rules are in this book, whatever has in here, and then they have some rules, but then in your advanced rules or on your army books, there are some other ones that oversees those basic rules. So between the two, this is what's going to be a little bit crazy in this game. You have this main rule book, you have the army books, and then on top of that, you have a lot of online where they have changes, where they have messed up in the rules and it can fix them. So you have to make a decision. Do you play with a fixed version, or do you play with what's actually in the rule books? If you start doing just the sum of them, it's going to be kind of tough. And a lot of people want to play with the sum because whatever helps their army is what they want to pull out, but they don't want to show all the ones that are actually makes the army weaker. But again, when those rules don't follow each other, you're going to have to make that up. This goes into the point where we're now talking about the actual turn itself and how does that work. So a turn starts with, before you even start, you set up the army. Normally you decide and you roll 1 through 6, and it tells you different scenarios. And I think it could be important to actually go through what those scenarios are. In your book on page 144, starts with a different kind of scenarios that you play. A battle line is probably the one that I recommend you're going to start. It's the first one, where you have the armies. You just take any armies from the battle. You set up the terrain. It says here it's page 143. That just means that you roll a d6, add +3. That's when you have terrain pieces. Then you go back and forth and place it anywhere on the table. Sometimes we do that, sometimes we let one person put everything out, and just depending on what, like for today, I put it out very nicely to make kind of a fun game. If you start putting back and forth, it doesn't look very nice on the table. It mainly is just what is the advantage for your class. So normally in tournaments, I always have to go back and forth. Doesn't look nice, but you do everything to help your army. Deployment. Here, deployment, you just pick one of the halves that you're going to have, and whoever is puts out their units first, they get +1 to roll on the d6 to see if they win the turn or not. Game length is 6 turns. You just play 6 turns, and whoever is, if you're still alive by the end of the 6 turns, you start counting the points. Victory conditions are if the general, you get an extra 100 points. The BSB, so battle standard, he would get an extra 100 points for that, and then you get 25 for every flag that you kill in a normal combat. So those are some extra points. Otherwise, it's just the point value on the unit. But remember, you have to kill the whole unit to get the points. Or if you kill a character, that is called a unit by itself, so you can take it. No other special rules. The only thing here is that it's 12 from the middle, and then it's a whole zone. Then you have dawn attack. Instead of going through all of them in detail, it's really that you have, this one's kind of fun, very similar to the last one, but what you do is you roll a d6, and on a 1 you get the left flank, on a 2 you get the right flank, and on anything between like 3 and 5 then you get the middle, and on the 6 you get to put it what you want. So imagine you have 6 different units, and I roll for those. Let's say I roll a 1 and a 2, so then I go on a 1 side and a 2 side. I have to put that unit there, and then I roll 2 2s, so that was in the middle, and then last one rolls 6. I didn't see where I placed these units, and then I decide where I want to place that last unit. The opponent does the same. And it's really a fun way to do it because it makes it a little bit harder, and it makes it a little bit more random than battle line. Battle for pass though is, instead of going from the big wide side to wide side, is the same as before, but you go from the short side to short side. That means that you have a lot more terrain to work on. So if you play a defensive army of shooting, this is an amazing map to start at, because you can be here in the back. Where if you go side to side, shooting armies is a little bit tougher. However, the opponent then will also, if you're shooting, will be right up in your face in this and try to run towards you. If they don't do that, they will put over here on this side, you pretty much won the game. So it depends a little bit how to set up. Blood and Glory. This is a very fun one, and it makes you build your army differently. This one has something called a breaking point. A little bit same like the first one. Let me show you here on this. You have the battle line where you have big side to big side. The only difference here is that they pushed you in a little bit to the sides, and you have a little bit wider here. Then what's different about this, you don't win the normal way. You can by totally annihilating someone, or in the end of sixth round, if you're still around, then you break. But in this one, what happens here is that you have something called a breaking point. So you get a few points, and it has to do all about the flags that you have. So if you decide to go in an army with no BSB, so not a main flag, and you didn't pay the extra 10 points to get extra flags, you can actually automatically lose the game before you even start. But if you, let's say you have 3 points in the breaking point, you have a general and you have maybe 1 flag, and the opponent has 5 in breaking points because there are more flags, they only have to kill 1 of your units, where you might have to kill 3 or 4 of their units. So then you can play this game very differently depending on what happens. The next thing, you have the meeting engagement. This is kind of like you come in late to the deployment, and you are going now from corner to corner. And this is also a very fun one, but you're very tight in the middle, so you can pretty much charge on the first turn, if that was allowed. And it's a little bit different here how you deploy it, but you do have reserves. So that is what's a little bit different about this one. And then you have the broken watchtower, is what we like to call it. Pretty much the one that gets the watchtower wins the game. So either you play it like this, or you change the rules a little bit, but the whole game is you don't win on anything else except in the end of the game who is holding the tower in the middle. And it's very hard to get someone out of the tower, especially someone that can make new armies and that kind of stuff. So it's really about them just trying to get in there. So if you can get in there first turn, you pretty much won. So I recommend changing the rules a little bit on that, and then you can have a lot of fun. But try it out a few times the way it is, and then see how it is. The other thing that I like about this game is that it has a game length that's not stagnant at 6. You actually roll a d6 plus 4, and if it ever hits 10, that's when it ends. So you don't know when the game is. So literally it could be very like a 4-game one, or you could play a lot longer, because you know d6, if you roll 1, keeps rolling ones every time. You need to literally do 9 rounds before you re-roll it. That doesn't happen very often though. But that's a little bit of how you set up the game, and that's before you even get started with the movement phase. So back then to the turn. You have now set up the table, but let's say y'all did battle lines, so you're on each side. Then you have four turns. Each player goes first, so now Skavens is going to move first. They have a movement phase, that's what we're going to talk about today. Then they have a magic phase, and that's how you resolve your magic and either make your character stronger, or make him move faster, or do direct damage, or do all kinds of cool stuff. Then you have a shooting phase. That's when you're trying to take from a distance, try to take down the opponents, especially the ones you have a hard time dealing with in close combat. And then you have the last part of the close combat. One thing to mention, the close combat happens twice on every on every game turn, because you do the movement, magic, shooting, and a close combat. Then the opponent in the same turn 1 does all those 4. But remember, the close combat is something you do together, because you're fighting opponents, and then you actually fight twice. So close combat is what you do the most of. But in the first few turns, you don't even use this at all, because you're not close enough to do close combat. But when you start getting into it, both opponents on both sides are fighting. So there's a lot of close combat in this game. So now, movement. How does this work? What do you need for the movement phase? I normally recommend that for the movement phase, you have a ruler, so you can with the inches, so you know how to measure. The other thing is the dices, so you know how far you're gonna measure, either if you have something something you don't know what's gonna happen and you have to roll something for that, or the normal movement, the charging, that kind of stuff. Sometimes you need different kind of dices, and I like to use 2 different kind of things from a stick to see where is the front arc for it, or to have a little bit more fun, you can also use a laser sight. Depending what you have, you might only have a normal laser sight, or you can take your local gun and then use that as well to take the distance. But those are the things that I highly recommend to bring. There's an extra feature with this if you're not happy with the game. So we'll get in now to how to do the movement phase. Let's talk about the basic movements. We're going to go through pages 12 through I will say probably, let's go through Alright, let's talk about the basic movements. Next, we're going to talk about the basic movements. It's going to be from page, if you're following along in the big book, from 13 to 27. We're going to talk about how to move your units. We're going to talk about a little bit of maneuvers, so wheel and reform. And we're going to go through the movement phase sequence. So start of turn, the charge, the compulsory moves, and remaining moves. And in each one of those that has extra items within. So we'll go through and explain a little bit how that works, so that by the time this section is done, you will know the basic moving capability. So when you play any games, this is the section that you're going to be looking at when you're doing the movement phase. But let's get started. So in this scenario, we're going to be using some clan rats and a character that they're going to be fighting. In the movement phase, we're going to show how the different kind of movements around. In this area, I'll put up some different scenarios with it, what that would look like. But first you need to know in movement, how fast do they move? These are clan rats, so the first thing you need to do is you have to look in your book in the Skaven book. This is page, let's see, that would be page 34. Then we'll tell you what they are. Earlier in this episode, we talked about the movement, the weapon skill, the ballistic skill, but for this, all you care about is the M value. And for clan rats, they have a movement of 5. So does their leader inside. So normally, and when you have an army list, almost all your characters are the same movement, and then you have some that are a little bit faster, maybe some that are slower, but mainly 90% minimum of the army list is the exact same movement. So if you know, look at your core troops, see what movement they are, and that's pretty much what you're moving. What does that mean in the movement phase? That means that if I have a ruler like this, that means 5 inches. So it makes it very simple for the game itself, because then all you have to do is say, okay, if I have 5 movement, I can move exactly 5 forward. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a little bit of a marker. It's always good to put a marker somewhere so you know where you started in case you want to remove it. In the 8th edition, you're actually allowed to measure as much as you want. In some of the early ones, you're not. So here you can actually look and see what you want to do. So, for instance, in this one, I can move straight up 5 inches, or I can do some maneuvers. One thing you need to know, whatever you do, however much movement you have, you're only allowed to go 1 inch away from any other unit or terrain. So you always have to be an inch away. And the reason for that is when we talk about the next phase, about the charging in this movement phase, only anything that touches, that means that you're actually going to be attacking that. So in this case, I can move then. You had movement 5, you can move 5 up, or you can move backwards half of that. So if that is 2.5, then you can move 2.5 back. So instead of moving just forward 5, you can do something called a wheel. And obviously, if you look at here, if you just move here 5, you're never going to hit this guy. You're going to pass him right by. So what you need to do is something called a wheel. A lot of people I see, they do this, and they think that, okay, a wheel here is 1 inch and then 2 inches. That's not how it works. It's actually very expensive to move. What you do is you take your finger at this edge over here that you want, like the pivot point. So for your fans out there, you pivot, and then here is the point where you take it. Then you measure, and one good way is to do it is to take a ruler like this, and then you see there's 1 inch, there's 1 inch, there's 2 inches, there's 3 inches, there's 4 inches, and here's 5 inches. So to make my whole movement just to turn, and I haven't actually moved forward, I just turned. You can see that this is actually further than it was before. It took me 5. This is very expensive. We're going to go over something remaining moves is that you can also actually move a march. It's called, so you can move a little bit extra. So now he can move another 5. So he has 10 movements. So therefore he maybe comes over here. But this whole movement was very expensive. What you can do instead is something called a reform. And there's 2 ways to do this with a reform. Is one, you can do a reform, and if you don't have a musician, then you can do a reform and say, okay, I just want to place my unit this way and I'm done, and then we're going. If you have a musician, though, it's worth mentioning that then you can actually roll for a leadership test, and if you succeed, then you can do a free reform and then do your normal movement. You can even shoot after that. If you do a normal reform like this without a musician, you can't shoot either. So for 10 points normally, it's good to have a musician in the team. But if you don't buy it, make sure you know the opponent, what they have. Next, we're going to talk about the start of turn. And this is going to go through the actual phase of the movement. You always have 3 things in the movement. You have the start of turn, you have the charge, and then you have the compulsory moves, and then the remaining moves. The start of turns is anything that says I need to do something beforehand. So for instance, this is a doom wheel from the Skaven. It's a very fun little unit, and the main thing of that one is that it rolls over and squishes everything underneath and then shoots electricity. But the first thing this guy has to do is to, in the start of turn, it says that you have to do a random movement. And it's 3d6. So what I'm going to do, let's say I start the turn with this one. I can then turn this guy any way I want. And start a turn can be a lot of things that you have to do something, like a magic happens, or anything that you have to do. You have to pay, you have a special army list and it says you have to do this at the start of turn. Then you have to do those. But for this guy, for instance, in the start turn, he does his movement. And then he rolls forward, and it goes up by 11, 12, 13, 14. So then if you look from here on, if he would go 14 forward, he would go straight in and do an impact attack, and that would be declared as a charge because it hits him. You could also go, let's say you roll a little bit less, and then it comes to right here and stops. But it's something you have to do at the start of the turn. So some characters or units don't move when they're supposed to, or when they're charging or in normal move phase. They have their own kind of movements. So that is one way to look at it. The next thing you want to look at is the charge. So after you've done the start of turn, you want to say, now I want to go and start fighting. So one of the main reasons to play Warhammer is all the really fun fights and the scenarios you set up and everything else. So how do you get in? We talked before about the movement where you had 5 and you got here, but you had to remember always end 1 inch away from anything. And now let's say instead I want to take these guys and actually charge these and attack this. A couple of things I need to know again. Again, I need to know the movement, and it's 5. So I'll just put a dice up here for 5, so remember this 5 in movement. Then the next thing we're going to do is you have to declare a charge. If I'm the opponent and Baylor here, the dog, my dog is the other player, I need to say I'm going to take this unit and I'm going to charge that unit. The way it works in Warhammer is that you don't just sit there and take it. Baylor can then decide, do I want to either and it's called a charge reaction. Then I can say, do I either want to hold? That means that I'm just going to stand there and see what happens. Or I can say, I want to stand and shoot. So this guy doesn't have any arrows, but let's say I had a unit that had arrows. Then they can say, no, you know what, I'm going to stand and take it. But when you get close enough, and that always counts that you are within range, so that you don't get minuses because distance or anything. So if you make it, you're within that range, but you do get a -1 to shoot because you stand and shoot is a skill. So that is one. So you can either hold, just take it, nothing happens. You just continue doing your roll. Stand and shoot if they can shoot, or do something special that they can do as a reaction. Or they can decide to flee. So we'll go through those kind of scenarios. Stand and hold, that means that I just go in there and we start the fighting. Stand and shoot, that means that let's say I have a bow. I'm allowed in, and I only have one bow, I'm allowed in to shoot, see what happens, and we take that in the shooting phase to explain how that works. But then you shoot, immediately remove the casualties. That means that if you get down, shoot off 25% of this unit, they do take a panic test. So if you have a very large unit with shooters, make sure you utilize that correctly to try to whittle down the enemies. Normally when you are someone with a bow, you're not so strong in close combats, vice versa. And then the last thing is flee. You can also decide to flee. So let's say this unit, I don't think I can beat this unit. There's no reason in Warhammer to just take every fight and lose it. There's a strategy in the whole thing. Just like chess, sometimes you retreat, sometimes you let a pawn go. The same thing in Warhammer, sometimes you let units go. So I might want to lock them in for some reason. But in this scenario, let's say I realize that the best action for me is to flee and fight another day. It is totally acceptable in Warhammer, unless if you're a flag bearer, then you lose it. But so in this instance, the king of the Chaos Army that's sitting on here, probably not going to have an issue at all to kill this whole unit. But let's say for some reason he had a bad day and he wanted to get out of here. Then what we do is he immediately rolls the 2d6, and it's only 2 inches, so that was not good. You turn the figure away, and you go from middle of your base to middle of your base. And if you don't know exactly what that is, you could use a laser pointer and then say this is the middle. I don't know if you can see the laser. Some people use, you know, their gun to actually use a laser pointer, or other people maybe use like just a normal laser pointer. But it's always good to have something with you in case the opponent is really not doing what you need. It's the quickest way to win the game. Last time we showed you the dices. Another way is to bring your firearm. So for you guys that like airsoft, this is a great way to shoot them in the leg or something else if they're not behaving. But for instance, here is, if you take the laser pointer and go straight from straight, then you can see this is the line, and then you move him exactly 2 inches. And then he goes this 2 inches. What does that mean? That means that now I can decide what I want to do. I could either declare and say, you know what, let's say there was another unit over here. I could either say, you know, I don't want to go against him. Instead, I want to take this one instead. So you don't have to follow, unless you have something called frenzy, and then you have to roll. Otherwise you always have to go after that unit. But otherwise you can decide, I want to go after this one instead. So that way, if you run, you're not just lost a turn. However, in this case, we're going to decide and say, you know what, I want to follow. If something is fleeing, remember that if you ever catch something fleeing, they would automatically die. So in this case, I roll and see how far I go. I go 9 plus my 5, so that would be the 14 inches. What happens here is that you will actually catch him, and you will stand right there, and you will automatically kill this guy. So for the king of the Warriors of Chaos, this probably wasn't the best move for him. He would have died just by trying to run. But let's say he rolled a high roll, he will jump through the building and came across, and you will never have been able to catch him. The other thing that could happen is, let's say I roll something lower. Let's say I rolled a 4, so I only rolled 9. What will happen then is, you will think you would go up 9 inches and stop there, but that's not what happens. It's called a fatal charge. So instead, is you look at the 2 dices. I rolled 2 4s, but let's say I rolled a 3 and a 2, just to make, for this instance, you still would have failed. And then you take the largest dice, that would be a 3, and then you move him. If you have to angle him, let's say he was over here, you then angle him 1 2, so you lost 2, and then you go 1 inch forward. Or in this scenario, where you were here, you will just, since they're straight at each other already, you just go 3 inches forward, and that's it. And then they count as a failed charge. The next thing that could happen is that he flees off the table. Let's say the scenario was the opposite. This is the unit over here, and the Chaos King is charging. Over here, you probably can't see it, but that's the end of the table. If I decide, and now the Chaos King is attacking, and my army is here, and I decide I want to flee off the table, what happens is I turn, but I might have a very bad strategy and say, you know what, maybe if I get really lucky, I roll 2 here, I don't move very far away, so I maybe end up here, he rolls the lowest he can, and then he won't kill me. Not the best strategy, but let's, for instance, say that. So I decide I'm going to take he's going to charge, I'm going to take the reaction, I'm going to flee, I turn it around, and then bam, I ran off the table. When this happens, anything that runs off the table is out of game, and you automatically lose it. Whoever is the opponent then gets the point for this. The reason I say the opponent, because you can play multiple people, so whoever face it is and something dies gets the points. And that's good to know if you play multiple players and suddenly in your face something happens that an opponent, like one of the opponents, ran off the table. Even if it wasn't you, it's the persons that is faced that gets the point. You could do house rules to do different on that, but that's what the official rules that we play. Now, there's different ways to do charging. Like you saw before, is to take your normal move, that is 5, plus 2d6 if you're just a normal character. If you have something that is very fast though, however, like let's say a horseman, you have something called a swift stride, and if in that case you roll 3 of them, but you still only take the 2 highest. So if I roll, let's say here, you probably can't see the dice, 5, 4, 2, then you take away the 2 and it's the 5 and a 4, and most likely this guy has 80 movements, so then you take the 8 plus that and then you'll get in. But to show a little bit what this will look like, let's say I want to charge this guy. It makes very much sense if you go straight forward. However, you can also do something else. Let's say this guy is standing over here. What happens then is, the first thing you want to do, you need to look at who am I charging. So on this character, what you do is you're looking at who am I charging, and you have to decide where am I going to charge. Is it charging in his front? Is it in his side? And the way you look at that is you look at the character itself that you're attacking, not your character, because a lot of people look like this way. Anyway, here in 45-degree angle is I hit him in the front, but you actually look at this character, you draw a line, or in our case, you could pick up your local airsoft gun, and then you see exactly what is the angle that you're going to hit. And then you see that the angle is going to be right here. And by doing that, you see that most of the characters is actually on this side. That means that when I charge, I actually have to hit him in the side. So what that will mean is that when I charge, I will need to come in an angle at the point where I hit him on the side. And I'm going to move these characters over a little bit so the camera is not in the way. We'll do the same thing over here, pretend this is the setup. What's going to happen then is, you might say, but you can only move straight forward, you're going to miss him. But the way it works is you get one free 90 turn. So what I want to do is I need to try to maximize. So I'll turn the unit towards him. Then now, when I roll, I then see if I get in. And I have a movement of 5. You always measure from the lowest point, because if you ever touch a unit, then you automatically change. So here's a 9. So if I have a 5 minus 9, that means that I need to roll at least a 4 on the charge. So I roll this. If I get really unlucky, I might not hit it, and then it's a failed charge, but I did. I had plenty of movement. So you move straight forward. If you're not used to playing Warhammer, you can always, to get exact measurement, you can use one of these rulers to just, and then you follow the ruler up. You hit him, and the next thing what happens is, depending on what happens, you should always be the one turning. But it could be that the opponent, that you can't, that you have a, let's say there is something like here in the way, and then then Baylor will be laughing, you can't hit me because there's something in the way. But no, it doesn't work like that. You swing as far as you can, then they have to say to close the loop. So they still have to do it. And then you move so you maximize afterwards. This was a little bit complicated, but that's the way it works. The other way, let's say I have nothing in the way, it's very simplified. You turn it. Then if you had enough move, you always have to maximize to get as many characters in as possible. Since this plate is the same, if we look over here on this side, it's the same as about 2.5. That means I need to have 3 of the characters in the movement. So that is how you do a charge. But what happens if you have multiple characters, or you want to do multiple charges at one time? So let's say I have Skaven here. I have another Skaven here as well. And we're going to do this again. You have 2 of them. The first thing you got to do again is take up your gun, look at the movement. On this one right here, it's going to be in his front arc. On this one over here though, however, is still going to be in his side. So they're going to be charging in two different areas. So what you look at is, we're going to do 2 scenarios. One that's going to be both in the side, and one that's going to be from front. The first thing you have to do is start over again. I'm going to say that I'm going to look, first of all, for strategy, I'm going to look at these, say, who has the best movement and angle that I want this guy to go. If I charge with these guys, he will run and he will click this one and go over. If I follow, I would actually get stuck. If I charge with this one, the angle is this way, he will go this way and I can maybe catch him. So in the charge, when I say declare these charges, the opponent Baylor would then decide, is he going to take it or not, and from whom? So he might run strategically into this wall knowing he's going to pop out, and I can't follow, because if I ever hit a wall or a terrain piece in the game, I'll automatically stop. So it's a very good way of running away, is by running into these kind of settings, except if your character type won't allow you. So I'm going to start. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to make sure that maybe that if he's going to run and go for the first one, maybe, or depending how you look at it. So I'm going to say I'm going to declare a charge with my general here, that is a wizard that's been held up by a few Skavens. As a reaction, I'm the king. I'm just going to take it. I think that's great. Let me just eat up your main wizard and your general. Then you don't actually do the charge. Then you have to go to the next unit and say the same. I would like to charge. And now, here's the thing where the king could say, maybe this was too much for me. This is not the time. Then I try to run. But in this scenario, I'm going to say, no, I'm going to take it. Both have been declared. You then go around the table, ask the same. So you have the whole table cleared off. We normally put some kind of marker so we know it's charged. I normally like to use the dices that see how many there are to roll. And then you go through. Now you have to go in the same order that you declared the charge is how you resolve it. So this guy is going to have his movement 5 plus the 3, so it's 5, 6, 7, 8. That looks very, very close. But again, you do from the corner to corner. And here's where you come down and you start arguing, is that a millimeter away or not? But in this case, it's just a little bit off. He would actually then go 1 inch down or half an inch that way, and then 1.5 is what he would move forward, and he will actually fail that charge. We'll come back and say he made it later just to show you what that looked like, but now this guy is going to come in. They have 5 movement, they go from closest to closest, and that's 7.5. So it needs 3, so he literally could fail if I roll a double once. His 5s is actually in, has plenty of movement. You get 1 free 90 degree. So you kind of angle it as much as you can, and then you just go boom, straight in, turn and maximize. Since he failed, this is what it's going to look like. If he would have not failed, it's important also to realize that if you have a unit in the way and you can't hit the character, that doesn't automatically move forward and fail. You still move, but you do it's counted as a fail. So if you go back to this scenario, one of the reasons why I decided to go with this one first too was that I want to make sure I can get in and not be these guys be in the way. Let's say I would have rolled something else than a very low roll, so roll this. I would then have turned, run straight, hit him, and go on that side. Same as we did last one. We're not going to re-roll. Went through first, angle it, run, turn, and then turn and maximize. And now you have both of them in the fighting scenario. They are now allowed to all work. They also count as a charge in the front and in the flank. So this is important too, because when you do the combat resolution. But that's like the basics of the charges. We have now gone through the start of turn, the charge, and the compulsory move. And we're now going to start the compulsory moves. So what is compulsory move? Compulsory move section is normally when something happens. So for instance, doing one like this, it could be that it says instead of a start of turn, it says that it has to do it in a compulsory move phase, and then it's something that you're forced to do. Depending on the type, that's what this could be in the starter turn or in the compulsory turn. That's when you do whatever it says in your special armory list. But the main things that happens in a compulsory. So let's say the scenario here, where we had, and if you remember in the beginning, we have the Chaos King, the Clan Rats from the Skavens. Baylor decided that he's going to tail it and run. These guys didn't catch. Now it's compulsory move. since it's technically the Skavens' turn, just to make it simpler for everyone, we'll say the Skavens are running, the king is after. The Skavens now it's their turn, so they have to do a compulsory. The king doesn't do anything in the Skavens' turn, but in the Skavens' turns, the Skaven then decide, I'm going to try to stop. There's a couple of things here that you need to know. One, since they did run, their banners had already died. But so that's the first thing to lose when you're running. We didn't go through that, but if you have a banner, either a BSB or a banner, and you flee, you automatically lose that. Some house rules, they play with that. If you run with a banner, you still got to keep it, especially a BSB. That was probably kind of a silly rule in the 8th edition, but we play by that rule. So in our games, if you run, you lose the banners. You do, however, not get points for it, though, in the end of the game. So let's say now the Skavens. These have a musician, and the first thing you're going to do is look at their leadership. The bad thing about clan rats is that they are not very high in leadership. So if we look at their leadership score, their clan rats leadership is only 5. Normally they will get the highest person in the team's leadership, but when they're running, they actually doesn't get they get the highest leadership, but they don't get the rows. What you normally do with Skavens is that you always stack an extra 3 rows minimum, and the reason for that is you get a leadership roll. So if you have 5, then it's 6, 7, and 8. So now they have 8 in leadership. But let's say this guy right here that's on top that we took off is too much. This has, let's say, leadership 7. So I have to roll a 7 or below to make it. I rolled a 6, so because of that, I can just now turn around. And this happens in not the turn that you flee, it's the next turn that is your turn that you turn around. But let's pretend it was this turn. The other thing that could happen is that, let's say you rolled a 9, that wasn't high enough. What happens then is you have to continue running. And then I roll again 2d6, that's 5. You then measure, and then Baylor starts barking because you just ran off the table. And he's pretty happy about that. He gets to eat all the figures that runs off the table. I try to sometimes give him dog treats instead, and that sometimes saves my models, especially something like this that are kind of expensive. It's going to cost you at least probably $100 or so to replace. So it's a hard game to have your figures run off the table. And that's pretty much it for the compulsory move section. It's when we're playing the game and something special happens, then we'll let you know. But compulsory could also be that suddenly you decide in the middle of a game to bring out your Honda Fireblade and just go for a ride. I mean, those are the things that happen sometimes. So you never know in Warhammer what really is going to happen, but I highly recommend having a motorcycle ready to go when you get tired and go out there. Either that, or like I said before, get ready to shoot your opponent, and then you keep them on edge at all times. That's for that. The next section we're going to go into is going to be the remaining move section. And the remaining move sections is a little bit longer one, and this is when you're actually going to do most of your movement phase. You have in the first phases, so you have the start of turn, it's pretty quick normally. The charge is where you spend a little bit of time, but in the first couple of rounds that you go with you and your opponent, there's not going to be much charging because you're pretty much moving up. But do not, and then you have the also compulsory moves, but the real trick to Warhammer is to master the movement phase. I can't say that enough, so I'll say it again. The real trick to winning Warhammer games is to really focus on your movement. So if you're looking online, if you're going to look at some of our videos, really take a look at how do we do the movements in the first few rounds and what is the effect of that in round 5 and 6. That's really what it's all about. But remaining moves. So we'll go through this. We talked already a little bit about moving forward. I did a quick rundown about this before we started the phases, but now we're going to go into the real stuff. So again, they have movement 5, so I can move either 5 up, or if you want to go sideways without turning, always think of it this way. If you don't go forward in the forward arc, everything is going to cost you double. So this will be for them, that's 5. Then you can only, if I want to sidestep 1, that actually costs me 2. So that means a maximum and 2.5 that I can go sideways. That was expensive. But here's the beauty. You don't just have movement 5. So as long as there's no enemy units around you, you have something called a march. There's a few units that do not have marches. So for instance, a chariot does not have a march, but it does say on your type. So maybe we'll go through and say what are the different types of Warhammer and how does that work. But for now, just think of it this way. 90% of all the units have march, or they have some restriction that directly says on there, like for instance the Tomb Kings or the Vampire Counts. But for instance, Skavens, they have 5. What does march mean? That means you, wow, instead of 5, that only gets you here, you can move 10. This is a huge difference in movement from just there to all the way up to the table. That means that you can also do your turns within those 10. So think of it this way, utilize your full movement. Do remember though, if you're marching, there is some restrictions on shooting and other things, so always look at what is it you want to do next in the next phases that affect if you marched or not. But a standard rule, try to just move as much as you can, try to get closer to the enemy, get in their face and start fighting, unless you have a different army. But I mean, that's for a starting up player, you're going to very quickly want to move in, start fighting, get into that, do a little magic, do a little shooting, because most likely the opponent has also just started playing the game. You're not going to start finagling and using all terrains and all different kind of advantages yet. You will though when you get into it, and that's why terrain is so important, how you set it up. Now lone models is a little bit different. So the king here has a huge advantage over, let's say, this horde of Skavens. I mean, for them, just imagine them turning. I'm going to turn, they have movement 5 and I'm going to turn now. So I want to turn, this is 1 inch, 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches. I literally just move this little piece right here, my whole movement. So having a big unit is great when you're fighting, because then you're most likely going to win. Being a lone character though has advantages. A lone character don't have any rules for actually turning. So if I'm a lone character like this, or if I'm a monster, either one of these kind of guys, I'm going to take it with a bigger one so it's easier for you to see. Let's say I have a movement, and this one has a movement of, I can't remember what I have, let's say 6 for instance. For me to actually turn right here, normally with a unit, that would cost me either a reform, a swift reform, or it will cost me a lot of points. However, on a character, all you do is you just put your finger in the middle, turn it the way you want. Now it didn't cost me a single thing. I move up 3, then I might want to move again. Just make sure you're not cheating, so you're always in the middle, and then you move this way, maybe another 3, and that's how you can move around stuff. So if you have stuff on the ground, you can move away. Some people just, if you know where you're going, you just say, okay, there's my middle, I want to go to here. Yep, that is within the march, and then I move it, and at the end I turn him wherever I want. That is also okay, as long as there's not a bunch of stuff here in the way. I've seen a lot of people say that this is here, and then let's say the total movement with march is 10. They just go from here to here is 10, therefore I can get here, I turn him anywhere I want. Now he can fly, so he can fly over, but let's say he couldn't fly. You actually don't have to measure, and 10 is actually right there. So you didn't get as far as you wanted. So something to look at is always you have to be able to move on the ground where you're going. So that is important as well. Then we probably should talk about reinforcements, because the last thing that would happen as well, or depending on where it is reinforcements. You might have let's say you couldn't fit everything on the board. So in your remaining moves phase, you also have reinforcements. There's a little bit different rules here on that too, but I'm just going to say the basics. The basics is you move him in, and then you do one, and you have to turn him. This one is a little bit tricky, but let's say we turn him here, so he's touching, and then he gets to do his move. Remember that charge phase has already been done, so he can't charge, so he can just do his remaining move. Let's go with a normal army. That one has so many special rules. This one right here, then we'll just go and let's say they just moved their 5. So they come in here and they decide to move 5 and then do maybe an inch movement. That's how you do it. They still get to shoot though, because the shooting phase hasn't started. They still get to do magic. The magic phase hasn't started, so that doesn't really affect it. The only thing that will affect it is I now march with 1 inch. That might have not been good if I had slow weapons, but that's about it for Romania moves phase. The next part we're going to do is just showcase a little bit here on the table what it would have looked like in the movement. For you saw from the beginning, we're moving some characters around, and then after that, this section of the video is done, and we're going to go into the magic phase and how that works. So here's what a battlefield now looks like before we start doing just a movement phase for the Skavens. It is the main thing that I have. They have some storm vermin. They have the doom wheel. They have some plague monks. They have the general that is led by some the Skavens. And over here they have another. Oh, he keeps falling off, but this guy right here is another wizard on top of an ogre that I have, a rat ogre. And over here they have a cannon, and then also they have a poison thrower as well. Those are the ones that this game has. 2 to fight, and they have some chaos horse riders. They also have a monster, and they have some chariots. Over here they have some riders as well that is pretty tough. They have their BSB that's hanging out in the back. Highly not recommending doing that. Put them in your units. And then you have the king. And over here they have that is not actually on the table, but they are going to be ambushers, so they have special rules for that. And then on top they have a demon prince. So that is what they're fighting. And then on the other side over here they have a demon spawn as well that is coming in. So this is the town. What's happened here is that the Skavens, as you can see here, is their Skaven bell. This is it used to be an empire city that the Skavens totally annihilated. It came up through the sewers and just destroyed the empire. Granted, the empire only had about say 600 points plus some civilians, and Skaven had about 4,000 points coming in. So in a Warhammer battle it would not be fair, but in real reality that's how it works. You normally take a larger army. As backup, there might be someone to help out here at sometimes, but Chaos has now realized that this was a very important town for them as well, because it's a good town for them to have to set up for them, and also to bring in more of their Chaos friends coming in. So they really need to take this over. So they have decided that it's time to do a little bit of annihilating of the rats. So they brought the sprays and everything else that they need to take them out. So this is what we're going to have. But it is the Skavens' turn now, and it's their movement phase. So the first thing that we're going to do is, if you remember, we have 4 phases. We have the start of turn, we have the charge, we have the compulsory moves, and then we have the remaining. So in the charge, we're going to decide what we're going to do. So let's line up and measure what we need. So after some discussing with Baylor and some rules that we weren't 100% okay with, I gave him some treats, and he has now decided that this was okay. I decided that I wanted to charge with my clan rats, his chariots. On here I have a movement of 5, and I need, this is just a little bit over 11. We had a big argument if it was 11 or 12, but in the end, as you can see, it was clearly, it was 11, and then a little bit more, so it's 12. So he was right. What that means is that I need to have, if I have a 5 and I need to do a 12, that means I need to roll a 7 to make it. So the first thing I'm going to do is say I want to charge here. Baylor then said, I'll laugh in the face of danger, and then he ran off and sniffed the tree. And I think that meant that he is going to stand and take it. So that means that I've declared a charge. I like to put down 2 dice for that, so then I know that they're going to run. The next charge I'm going to do is over here. I'm going to take the plate rat, and I'm going to try to hit the chimera. To do that, I have to measure again. You measure from the corner to the closest. And to do this charge, I really got to be lucky. I mean, I need to roll pretty high. I need to roll either 11 or 12 because it's an 18 charge. Or is it? No, it's a 16 charge. So I pretty much need to roll, and if I have 5, I need to roll a 10 or above on that. But I'm going to try to do that because it's important that I get this charge in. If I don't, they're going to get the charge, and maybe the horses and some other stuff. So those are the things I want to charge for now. Might have done this a little different if this was not the scenario. Then I go back to the original ones that I said I wanted to charge with. And then we see if I actually get in. So that's a 4 plus a 5. And that gives you 9. And then you look and see, and 9 wasn't enough. That is then declared a fail charge. So you then move 3 forward. And the first thing I need to do is I need to align these. They don't get any negative because they were on the hill. However, if they would have charged, they would have got a +1 in resolution because they're charging down the hill. That's why I placed them this way. So now you do of the 2 dices, remember a failed charge is the highest dice to get rid of the lower one. And then you have to move 3. So 1, 2, 2.5 probably is angle straight. And then I move another 1.5 inches forward. So that's how far you roughly get. And that's it. There was nothing else that happens on that. So that was not a very good failsafe. Next, I need to come in here and roll. This one I needed a very high one. And I failed it, so I would have gone 3. But let's say that I get extremely lucky. For the sake of the argument, I rolled an 11. The chances of this are very low, so in the game, obviously, when you calculate this, start thinking of percentages. What is the chance I'm going to make it? What is the chance he's going to make it? Problem is, since he's flying, he has movement 10. He automatically is in, so you have to count on that as well. But then you might want to back up instead. That would probably, in this scenario, would have been a much better move. But for the sake of learning, these guys made it. And they're then going to run. They're then going to run straight forward. And then they're going to do a turn. So that means, what this means is they're going to go forward like this, as much as can, turn, and then smack in. And then I had so much movement I could maximize this the way I wanted it. But I would like to have it here in the middle. And the reason for that is it's a little bit harder for these to get in. But that was my charges for this section. The next thing I need to do after charges is compulsory moves. The way this works now is that this doom wheel, that's the only thing that we have compulsory move in this. In the Skavens book, it states that it does its movement in the compulsory move, so this is where we're going to move him. Again, I'm going to take him and angle him the way I want. I'm just going to then say I'm going to go and I'm going to try to get as close to this as possible. And if I'm get really lucky, I like to hit it right on. I need to roll very high to do so. So you roll 3d6. First you angle exactly the way you want it, and then you roll. And here is, I rolled 12, 13 and 14 inches. So that's actually a pretty high roll. And then you take it and then you move 14 inches. So he ends up right there. This was actually not far enough. I didn't hit him, and I'm still the closest to this unit. And what that means is that in my shooting phase, I have a special ability that is actually one of the best abilities, where you roll for 3 shooting attacks, but it hits the closest unit, even your own. You really want to get the Doom Wheel into, let's say, close to the general or something like that. I mean, imagine if you're smack next to him and then suddenly do 3 strength 10 hits on that guy, and then with a d6 wounds each, and suddenly kill the king. That 100 plus points was totally worse smacking out this 650 points in one turn. So those are the things that are that could have been really good. But that is it for the compulsory. Now we come into the actual movement. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to get up as many of these as possible. So I have my Storm Vermin, that is my strongest of the unit. They have a movement 5, so let's just, for simplicity, I'll do it in sequence. So I do first 5 here is my normal move, but then I can also do my march. And what do I think this is going to look like? I think this is going to be in the game, this is probably going to be a standstill for a long time. These guys can now not charge the side, and that's what I was trying to get. They're going to charge here. That means I can't really get in here, and this is going to take a while before it's dead. So what's the next thing I can do? Is most likely I should move this direction. Remember, I already did my first move. It would have been much smarter to be over here. Since I have a magician, take the swift reform, roll a leadership roll, and then move this angle, and then move 10 out. I didn't do that, so instead, now I have to suffer with this pivoting. And you take the corner that you're turning, and then you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I end up like this. I still want to be this angle because most likely they're going to come in, and then I want to hit them in the side. So there is a little bit of strategy to this madness. I think I moved everything I want to move except maybe the wizard. I do maybe want to move him up so I'm in line of sight. So I might move him over here, but still be maybe, let's say, I need to angle him correctly. I want to be at least 50% here, so it's hard to target, because it would be really bad if they target him. Granted, the horses here can still go after him. And that is this unit over here. What we moved is him to move him over here to kind of angle here so you can see for the shooting, and then do the magic phase. So that was it for the movement phase. In next episode, you will have then starting with the Skavens magic phase.